My name is Clara, and at 33 years old, my job as a forensic accountant is to uncover the truth hidden in numbers. But the most horrifying truth I have ever uncovered was not hidden in an offshore account. It was locked behind a heavy steel padlock in my brother's basement. My sister-in-law called from her luxury ski trip telling me to feed her dog. When I went to her house, I expected to find a pampered poodle. Instead, I found my 8-year-old nephew emaciated and unconscious in a foul-smelling room. Next to his frail body was a dog bowl filled with dirty water and a heavy padlock mechanism installed on the outside of the door. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member. The nightmare began on a freezing Tuesday morning in early December. I was sitting at my desk in downtown Chicago, reviewing a tax evasion case when my phone lit up. It was Naomi, my brother Brendan's wife. Naomi was a 34-year-old African-American lifestyle influencer whose curated social media feed projected extreme wealth and perfect parenting. Her sponsored luxury vacations were the envy of 2 million followers. She rarely called me unless she needed a favor that she considered beneath her. I answered the call. "Clara, you need to go to the house right now and feed Bentley." Naomi barked through the speaker, not bothering with a hello. In the background, I could hear the distinct clinking of champagne flutes and the lively chatter of an upscale ski resort. "Naomi, aren't you in Aspen?" I asked, confused by her sudden demand. "Yes, obviously," she snapped. "Brendan and I are at the lodge on a brand deal. But my useless house manager just texted that she is quitting immediately due to an emergency. I need you to go feed the dog. The code is the same. Just do it, Clara. I cannot deal with this stress right now." She hung up before I could reply. There was no please, no thank you, just the absolute entitlement my parents had conditioned her and Brendan to expect. Brendan, 36, was the undisputed golden child. While I took out student loans for my accounting degree, my parents secretly mortgaged their home to fund Brendan's failed tech startups. He failed repeatedly until he landed a lucrative position through my father's connections. When Brendan married Naomi, my parents practically worshipped the ground she walked on, mesmerized by her social media clout and the illusion of high society she brought into their lives. I let out a heavy sigh, grabbing my winter coat and car keys. I cared about Bentley, their innocent toy poodle. The drive to their gated community was quiet. When I pulled into their sweeping circular driveway, the massive $2 million estate looked exactly like one of Naomi's posts. Perfect, pristine, and completely uninviting. I punched in the security code and pushed open the heavy mahogany door. The grand foyer was immaculate, smelling strongly of expensive floral diffusers and fresh lilies arranged in crystal vases. The heated marble floors warmed my boots as I walked past the sweeping staircase. I found Bentley in the heated sunroom at the back of the house. The tiny dog was lounging on a custom velvet bed next to an automatic dispenser filled with premium kibble and filtered spring water. He was living better than most humans. I filled his bowl with fresh food, gave him a quick scratch, and turned to leave. I wanted to spend as little time in this sterile house as possible. But as I walked past the heavy oak door leading to the basement stairs, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a smell. It was faint at first, heavily masked by the aggressive floral scent of the diffusers upstairs. But as I stepped closer to the basement door, the odor became sharp, distinct, and completely unmistakable. It was the acrid, stinging smell of unwashed bodies, ammonia, and decay. It smelled like sickness and neglect. My heart rate ticked up immediately. The sheer wrongness of that scent in this pristine mansion sent a cold shiver down my spine. "Brendan, is anyone down there?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the vast hallway. The silence in the massive house felt sudden and deeply suffocating. I opened the basement door and flicked on the light switch. The wooden stairs led down to a fully finished lower level, a space typically used as Brendan's home theater. I walked slowly down the steps, my forensic instincts screaming that something was fundamentally wrong here. As I reached the bottom, the smell grew overwhelmingly strong. It was not coming from the theater room. It was emanating from a small utility room tucked away in the darkest back corner of the basement. I walked carefully across the plush carpeting, covering my nose with the sleeve of my coat. When I reached the utility door, my breath caught in my throat. The door, which usually led to the water heater and the air conditioning system, had been heavily modified. A heavy-duty industrial padlock mechanism was bolted directly onto the outside of the door. The thick steel lock was securely snapped into place, sealing whoever was inside. Why would anyone lock a utility room from the outside with an industrial padlock? The implications were too terrifying to process. "Hello." I knocked extremely hard on the solid wood door. "Is someone in there?" For a long, agonizing second, there was absolute silence. Then I heard it. A sound so faint, so terribly weak, it barely registered over the low hum of the nearby furnace. It was a shallow, ragged wheeze, a weak, desperate human breath. My blood ran completely cold and pure. Terrifying panic completely seized my entire chest. "Leo," I screamed, rattling the heavy metal handle with both hands. "Leo, are you in there?" The door did not budge an inch. The industrial lock held firm against the reinforced frame. "Hold on, baby, Auntie Clara is here. I am getting you out." My mind raced back to a glossy, tear-stained selfie Naomi had posted just 3 days ago. The caption burned in my memory. "Saying goodbye is so hard. Sending my brave little man to a specialized wilderness retreat for kids. Mama is going to miss you so much, Leo." My parents had commented immediately, praising her incredible strength. If my 8-year-old nephew was supposedly at a specialized camp in the mountains who was taking shallow, rattling breaths behind a padlocked door in my brother's basement. I spun around and sprinted back up the wooden stairs to the kitchen. My eyes darted frantically around the pristine cooking space until I spotted a heavy red fire extinguisher mounted near the walk-in pantry. I ripped it off the wall, ignoring the sharp scrape of the metal bracket against my palm, and ran back down the stairs. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I hoisted the heavy metal cylinder and swung it against the padlock with all the strength I possessed. The noise was deafening, echoing off the basement walls like a gunshot. I hit it again and again, screaming in a mix of pure terror and boiling rage. The cheap wood of the door frame surrounding the heavy metal bracket finally splintered and cracked under the repeated blows. With one final desperate kick, the bracket tore completely free from the wood. The door swung outward. The stench hit me like a physical blow, a horrific mixture of stale urine and sickness that made my eyes water and my stomach heave. I dropped the fire extinguisher and fell to my knees in the doorway. Oh my God! Leo! He was lying on a stained, bare mattress shoved into the back corner of the windowless utility room. The space was completely dark save for the hallway light spilling in from behind me. My nephew was curled into a tight, fetal position, wearing nothing but a soiled, oversized t-shirt and thin sweatpants. His usually bright eyes were rolled back, his breathing dangerously shallow and erratic. But it was his physical condition that made me choke back a sob. He was completely emaciated. His cheekbones jutted out sharply against his pale skin, and his small arms looked fragile enough to snap. Next to the mattress was a cheap plastic bucket clearly used as a makeshift toilet. And beside that bucket, I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated rage wash over me. Beside that bucket was a dog bowl. It was filled with murky, dirty water and a few scattered crackers. This was not a punishment. This was torture. This was a literal cage for a human child. "Leo? Honey, can you hear me?" I whispered, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch his face. His skin felt like ice, his body completely unresponsive to my touch. I pulled out my phone with blood-stained, shaking fingers. I had not even realized the broken door had cut my hands. I dialed 911. "Please, I need an ambulance immediately," I told the dispatcher. My voice dropped the panic and shifted into the cold, clinical tone I used during high-stakes fraud depositions. Panic would not save my nephew, but swift action would. "I have an 8-year-old male, unresponsive, severe malnourishment locked in a basement utility room. The parents are out of state." As I waited for the sirens, I took off my winter coat and wrapped it tightly around Leo, pulling his fragile, freezing body against my chest. His breath hitched, a terrifying rattling sound that shook his tiny frame. While I held him on that filthy mattress, the pieces of the last 2 years began clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Leo suffered from celiac disease, a severe autoimmune condition triggered by gluten. Even a crumb of wheat could cause severe intestinal damage. Yet the crackers scattered around the dog bowl were regular wheat crackers. Naomi was not just starving him, she was feeding him the one thing that would violently destroy his internal organs. But for the past 2 years, Naomi had been publicly claiming that Leo had complex behavioral issues and severe oppositional defiant disorder. She aggressively monetized his supposed mental health struggles. She posted endless videos about the sheer exhaustion of raising a troubled child, gaining thousands of sympathetic followers and highly lucrative sponsorships in the process. My parents had bought into her narrative completely. They constantly praised Naomi's resilience and told me I needed to be more supportive of my brother's difficult family life. The blare of sirens cut through the quiet suburban street, snapping me back to the present. Paramedics rushed down the basement stairs mere moments later. Their professional composure cracked for a fraction of a second as they took in the dog bowl, the bucket, and the broken padlock swinging from the doorframe. "He is severely dehydrated and hypothermic," one paramedic said urgently, securing an oxygen mask over Leo's small face. "We need to move him right now. Are you the mother?" "I am his aunt," I said, following them closely up the stairs as they carried him on a stretcher. "His parents are in Aspen on a ski trip. They told everyone he was at a wilderness camp." The paramedic shot me a dark, grim look. "We are notifying Child Protective Services and the police department immediately. You need to follow us to Chicago Memorial Hospital." As the ambulance sped away with its lights flashing, I stood alone in the grand, perfectly decorated foyer of my brother's house. I looked at my bloodied hands, then pulled out my phone and called Naomi. She answered on the fourth ring. "Did you feed the dog or not, Clara?" she demanded. The sound of a crackling fire and laughter echoed in the background of her call. "I found him, Naomi," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I broke the lock. The laughter in the background stopped instantly. The silence on the line was absolute, stretching for 3 agonizing seconds before Naomi's voice came back. It was completely stripped of its usual curated sweetness. It was cold, sharp, and frantic. "You did what? Clara, are you insane? He is in timeout. He is being punished for stealing food from the pantry. You have no right to break my property." "He is unconscious, Naomi. He is emaciated and freezing. The paramedics just took him and the police are on their way to your house right now." "You called the cops?" Naomi shrieked, the panic finally breaking through her arrogant facade. I heard Brendan's voice in the background asking what was going on. "Clara, you psychotic, jealous witch. You are ruining our trip. Tell the police it was a misunderstanding right now. Tell them he locked himself in." "You put a dog bowl on the floor for your own son," I said, the icy rage crystallizing in my chest. "You are going to prison, Naomi." I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking violently. The silence of the mansion pressed in on me, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. I walked out the heavy front door, locking it behind me. I got into my car, gripped the steering wheel, and took a deep breath. The icy December air creeping through the windows matched the cold dread settling in my stomach. I put the car in drive and sped toward Chicago Memorial Hospital. The drive was a blur of flashing traffic lights. As the adrenaline began to ebb, an overwhelming wave of revulsion took its place. At a red light, I grabbed my phone. I needed to see the lie again. I opened the application and navigated to Naomi's page. Her flawless face filled the screen. I scrolled past sponsored posts for luxury skincare until I found the post from 3 days ago. Naomi stood at the airport departure gate wearing designer sunglasses pushed up into her styled hair. She held a cup of artisan coffee, looking wistfully into the distance. The caption was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. "Saying goodbye is so hard. Sending my brave little man to a specialized wilderness retreat for kids. Mama is going to miss you so much, Leo." The comment section was a sea of validation from her 2 million followers. "You are such a strong mother," one user wrote. I saw a comment from my mother, Catherine. "We are so proud of you, Naomi. Taking care of a child with complex needs takes a toll. Enjoy your rest in Aspen with Brendan." My fingers tightened around the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. While they skied on fresh powder, my 8-year-old nephew was locked in a pitch-black utility closet with a plastic bucket. While Naomi garnered sympathy and lucrative brand deals for her supposed struggles, Leo was wasting away on a filthy mattress drinking dirty water from a dog bowl. The crackers. My mind flashed back to the wheat crackers scattered on the floor. Leo had celiac disease. Those crackers were poison to his digestive system, guaranteed to cause internal damage. It was calculated, methodical torture. The light turned green, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. I arrived at the hospital and abandoned my car. The sliding glass doors parted, and the blast of sterile air hit me. The pediatric emergency wing was a frenzy of medical staff moving with urgent purpose. I rushed to the front desk. "I am looking for Leo," I told the receptionist, my voice tight. "He was just brought in by ambulance. I am his aunt." The receptionist looked up, her expression guarded. "I'm sorry, but since he is a minor, we can only release information to the biological parents or a legal guardian." "His parents are the ones who did this to him," I said, leaning closer to the glass partition. "You need to tell me if he is alive." Before the receptionist could answer, a tall man in a dark suit approached the desk. "Are you Clara?" he asked, flashing a silver badge. "I am Detective Harrison, Family Crimes Division." The paramedics gave me a brief rundown, "But I need you to come with me. We need a full statement." I followed him down a corridor to a small consultation room. The stark white walls felt very suffocating, but I forced myself to focus. For the next hour, I detailed everything. I explained the phone call from Naomi, the pampered poodle in the sunroom, and the industrial padlock bolted to the outside of the utility door. I described the fire extinguisher, the shattered wood, the filthy mattress, the bucket, and the dog bowl. I made sure to emphasize the wheat crackers and Leo's severe celiac diagnosis. Detective Harrison took meticulous notes, his jaw clenching slightly when I described the dog bowl. "You are certain the lock was secured from the outside?" he asked, his pen hovering over his notepad. "Absolutely certain," I replied, my voice steady. It was a heavy-duty padlock mechanism. A child could not have locked it from the inside. And Naomi practically admitted it on the phone. She claimed he was in timeout for stealing food from the pantry. Harrison closed his notepad. "We have units securing the house right now. Crime scene investigators are processing the basement. If what you are saying matches the physical evidence, they will have a lot to answer for." I thanked him and stepped back out into the bustling emergency room waiting area. The adrenaline was completely gone now, leaving behind exhaustion. I sank into a stiff vinyl chair, staring blindly at a muted television. The reality of the situation crashed over me. My brother, the golden child my parents had always protected, had allowed his wife to lock his own son in a cage. He had flown to a luxury ski resort while his child was dying in the dark. How could Brendan do this? We had grown up in the same house. Yes, he was spoiled and arrogant, but this was a level of depravity I could not comprehend. He had chosen Naomi's curated social media lies over the life of his own flesh and blood. Suddenly, my phone vibrated heavily in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw missed calls from my parents. Before I could dial them back, the automatic doors of the emergency room slid open. I looked up and felt the cold blood drain from my face. My parents, Catherine and Howard, strode into the waiting area. They did not look like terrified grandparents rushing to the bedside of a dying child. They looked exactly like furious executives marching into a boardroom to handle a catastrophic public relations crisis. My mother was clutching her designer handbag, her face pale with absolute rage, while my father scanned the room with a hardened glare. They had not come to check on Leo. They had come to protect Brendan. My mother, dripping in a pristine cashmere wrap, marched straight up to me. Her face was pale with an icy, controlled fury that I recognized all too well. She did not ask where her grandson was. She did not ask if he was alive. Instead, she grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin, and yanked me away from the nurse's station toward a secluded corner of the waiting room. "Clara, what on earth have you done?" she hissed, her voice a harsh whisper designed not to draw attention from the hospital staff. I yanked my arm out of her grip. "What have I done?" I asked, my voice rising. I found Leo locked in a utility closet. He was freezing and dying, Mom. My father stepped forward, pointing an accusing finger directly at my chest. He used his heavy, authoritative corporate voice, the one he always used to intimidate his subordinates and his children. Naomi just called us from Aspen. She was completely hysterical. He stated, "She said Leo was having a severe behavioral episode and you broke into their house and completely blew everything out of proportion. Do you have any idea the magnitude of the disaster you have caused?" I stood frozen for a split second. A disaster. A dying 8-year-old boy was not the disaster in their eyes. My phone call was. "The police are at Brendan's house." My father continued, his face reddening. "The neighborhood association president just called me. There are squad cars parked on the lawn of a gated community. You are actively destroying your brother's reputation over a simple disciplinary measure." A disciplinary measure, I laughed, a harsh and completely humorless sound that echoed off the sterile walls. "Dad, they left him with a plastic bucket and a dog bowl of dirty water while they flew to a luxury ski resort. They lied to you. They told you he was at a wilderness camp." Naomi was overwhelmed. My mother snapped, instantly defending the daughter-in-law she worshipped. "The boy is incredibly troubled, Clara. You do not have children, so you simply do not understand the immense pressure they are under. They needed a break to save their marriage, and you are trying to turn this into a criminal investigation just because you have always been deeply jealous of Brendan's success." The accusation hit me like a physical strike. Jealous. I looked at the two people who had raised me. The memories flooded my mind with blinding clarity. I remembered being 22 years old, sitting in our kitchen, while my parents demanded I cash out my hard-earned college savings bonds. They needed the money to quietly pay off Brendan's massive credit card debt after his first startup collapsed. "Family protects family," my father had told me back then, framing my financial ruin as a noble sacrifice for the golden child. I had spent the next 5 years eating instant noodles and working double shifts to finish my accounting degree, while Brendan drove a leased luxury car paid for by my parents. They had not changed one bit. They would protect Brendan and his perfect influencer wife, even if it meant stepping directly over the starved body of their own grandson. "He is 8 years old, Mom. He weighs 40 pounds, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. "If you try to protect them, I will make sure the police know exactly where you stand." "You do not understand how the real world works, Clara," my father barked, stepping right into my personal space to physically intimidate me. "Wealth and reputation are fragile things." Naomi was just pushed to her limit. "We are going to hire the best defense attorneys in Chicago, and we are going to fix this mess you created. Brendan's company will fire him if this goes public," my mother agreed. "Naomi's brand deals will be canceled immediately. Do you have any concept of the financial ruin you have unleashed on your brother?" I saved his son's life. I fired back, refusing to break eye contact or back down an inch. "But it is truly fascinating that your very first concern is Naomi's Instagram sponsorships and Brendan's corporate image. You are going to fix this," my father commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You are going to speak to that detective again. You will retract your statement. You will say you exaggerated the situation out of panic. You will say the door was simply jammed, not locked, and that you misunderstood the setup." They expected me to fold. They expected the obedient, pragmatic daughter who always absorbed the collateral damage of Brendan's mistakes to simply bow her head and clean up the mess. They thought I would participate in the cover-up to maintain the pristine facade of the family name. I looked at my father, the man who had always demanded absolute perfection. "I took pictures of the padlock, Dad," I said slowly, letting every word sink in. "I took pictures of the heavy steel mechanism bolted to the outside of the door. I took pictures of the filthy mattress. I took pictures of the dog bowl filled with murky water. And I already handed every single piece of evidence over to Detective Harrison. There is absolutely no retracting the truth." My mother actually gasped, taking a stumbling step backward as if I had physically struck her across the face. Her designer handbag slipped from her shoulder. "You gave photos to the police," she whispered, genuine horror creeping into her eyes. I gave them everything I confirmed, feeling a profound sense of liberation wash away decades of toxic family conditioning. And I told them exactly what Naomi said to me on the phone. I told them she was angry at me for ruining her vacation. "You vindictive little witch!" My mother hissed, her carefully curated elegance shattering completely into pure malice. "You are doing this to punish us. You are trying to destroy this family. I am protecting a child who cannot protect himself," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of any familial affection. "You two have spent your entire lives enabling Brendan's worst behavior. You covered up his financial disasters, you bought his way out of trouble, and you celebrated his narcissistic wife. But this is where it stops. This is where the cleanup crew resigns." My father's face contorted with a mixture of panic and rage. "We will testify that you have a history of instability, Clara. We will tell the police that you have a personal vendetta against Naomi. No one will believe a single childless accountant over a respected executive and a prominent public figure. We will bury you in court if we have to." The threat was explicit and brutal. They were fully prepared to destroy my life, my career, and my freedom just to keep their golden child out of federal prison. They were willing to sacrifice me without a second thought. "You can certainly try," I said, crossing my arms over my chest and staring them down. "But I am not the naive college student you bullied into paying off Brendan's debts anymore. I know exactly how to fight, and I know exactly how to trace a lie." Before my father could launch another vicious threat, the heavy double doors of the trauma unit swung open, interrupting the standoff. Dr. Mitchell, a stern pediatric intensive care specialist with exhausted eyes and a crisp white coat, stepped into the waiting area. He scanned the room, his gaze bypassing my perfectly coiffed parents to focus directly on me. He likely recognized the dried blood and wood splinters still clinging to my winter coat from breaking down that basement door. "Family of Leo Blackwell," he asked, his voice tight with suppressed professional anger. My father immediately stepped forward, seamlessly slipping into his authoritative corporate persona. He adjusted his expensive tie, attempting to seize control of the narrative before I could speak a single word. "I am his grandfather, Howard. This is my wife, Catherine. We deeply apologize for the dramatic and chaotic entrance of our daughter, Doctor. She tends to overreact. Our grandson suffers from severe psychological issues, including a complex eating disorder and extreme self-harming tendencies. His parents were unfortunately forced to secure his room for his own safety before they had to step out of state for an urgent business emergency." I watched my father deliver this rehearsed lie with terrifying ease. He sounded reasonable, concerned, and entirely convincing. He was deploying the exact same manipulative tactics he used in boardrooms to crush corporate rivals. Dr. Mitchell stared at my father for a long, intensely uncomfortable moment. The doctor's expression did not soften. Instead, the air in the sterile hallway seemed to freeze entirely. "A business emergency," Dr. Mitchell repeated flatly, his tone completely devoid of any respect for my father's display of wealth. "Mr. Howard, your grandson is not suffering from a simple skipped meal or a minor behavioral episode. He is suffering from acute prolonged malnutrition, severe dehydration, and critical hypothermia. His core body temperature was 94 degrees when the paramedics brought him through those doors. His organs were actively beginning to shut down." My mother let out a loud theatrical gasp, clutching her cashmere wrap tightly against her chest. "Oh, my poor sweet boy. Naomi told us he had been refusing to eat his meals, but we had no idea he was doing this to himself. He is a very troubled child, doctor. He hides food and refuses to drink water when he throws his tantrums. Naomi is a wonderful, dedicated mother. She has millions of followers who look up to her parenting advice. She has tried everything to help him." Dr. Mitchell did not even blink at my mother's mention of Naomi's social media fame. He pulled a digital tablet from his coat pocket, his eyes narrowing to dangerous slits. Furthermore, Dr. Mitchell continued completely ignoring my mother's performance. "His comprehensive blood work just came back from our toxicology lab. We found dangerously high levels of prescription sedatives in his system, benzodiazepines, the exact kind of heavy medication prescribed for severe adult anxiety and panic disorders, certainly not something ever prescribed to an 8-year-old child weighing 40 pounds. The words hit the air like a physical strike. Sedatives. Naomi had not just locked my nephew in a pitch-black, freezing basement. She had deliberately and heavily drugged him so he would not cry or scream for help while she was thousands of miles away sipping expensive champagne in Aspen. She had sedated an 8-year-old boy to ensure his absolute silence. "That must be a massive mistake," my mother stammered, her flawless composure finally cracking under the weight of hard medical evidence. "Naomi would never do such a thing. The boy must have gotten into her private medicine cabinet himself." "I told you he is deeply troubled and erratic, doctor. He steals things. He probably ingested those pills to punish his parents." I stepped right between my parents and the doctor, positioning myself as a physical barrier against their relentless gaslighting. "He was locked inside a utility closet from the outside." "Catherine," I interjected, my voice echoing sharply down the hospital corridor. I refused to call her mom in that moment. He did not drug himself into a stupor and then magically snap a heavy-duty industrial padlock on the other side of a solid oak door. Dr. Mitchell turned his intense gaze to me. "You are the aunt who found him, the individual who called emergency services from the residence." "Yes," I replied, holding my head high. "I am the one who broke the lock off the door frame. I am the one who found him lying on a filthy mattress. And I am the one who saw the dog bowl filled with dirty water placed next to a plastic toilet bucket." Dr. Mitchell nodded grimly, validating my testimony. "We are working aggressively to stabilize him in the trauma bay right now. We have started him on continuous intravenous fluids and broad-spectrum antibiotics to address a severe infection developing in his lungs. But there is a massive complication. Because of his documented celiac disease, his intestinal lining is already severely compromised. Withholding safe food from a child with this specific autoimmune condition while simultaneously exposing him to wheat crackers rapidly accelerates total organ failure. The combination of the gluten exposure, the starvation, and the heavy sedatives created a lethal cocktail. If you had found him 12 hours later, Clara, we would be having a very different, much more tragic conversation." My legs felt suddenly weak, but the burning fire of absolute rage in my chest kept me standing tall. My parents fell completely silent, entirely unable to immediately spin the horrific reality of organ failure and adult sedatives. Their usual PR tactics were useless against hard medical science and critical care protocols. Dr. Mitchell looked at his tablet one more time before delivering the final blow to my parents' fragile narrative. "I have formally notified Child Protective Services. A senior caseworker is already en route to the hospital. Because the biological parents are out of state and the circumstances of the injuries indicate severe criminal abuse, the hospital administration has placed Leo under an emergency medical hold. No one is permitted to enter his room. That includes you, Clara, until CPS officially clears you. But it absolutely includes the grandparents." They thought their threats would silence me. They thought I would retreat to my quiet accounting job and let them sweep a dying child under the rug. "You take him home," I said, maintaining unblinking eye contact with my father. "You take him back to your house. But understand this, Howard. The protective shield you think you have built around Brendan and Naomi is made of glass, and I know exactly where the cracks are." I turned my back on them and walked toward the hospital exit. The automatic doors slid open, hitting me with a blast of freezing Chicago winter air. The police were slow. The child protective system was flawed and easily manipulated by expensive lawyers and fake medical binders. If I relied on the standard authorities, Naomi would inevitably slip through their fingers. She would post another crying video, blame the basement on a tragic misunderstanding, and walk away clean. I needed a weapon the system could not ignore. I needed to bypass their emotional manipulation and strike directly at the one thing my family valued above all else: their wealth, their pristine financial reputation. Naomi thought she had won because she convinced a tired caseworker that she was a stressed mother. But she forgot one crucial detail. She forgot who built the digital architecture holding her dirty money. She forgot that I am a forensic accountant. I do not argue with fake tears. I argue with bank statements. I argue with wire fraud. I argue with tax evasion. I walked slowly to my car. The sadness and panic that gripped me in the basement were gone now, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. My family wanted to use their financial power to crush me and silence Leo. I would follow the dirty money. I drove back to my apartment, my mind racing. As soon as I walked through my front door, my phone began vibrating intensely against the kitchen counter. It was a torrential flood of pings and alerts overlapping into a continuous drone. I unlocked the screen. Hundreds of messages from unknown numbers, social media alerts, and missed calls from casual acquaintances filled my display. Naomi had just posted a new, highly edited video. It already boasted 500,000 views. I clicked play. Naomi sat in the plush, perfectly lit nursery of her mansion, a room I knew Leo never actually used. She wore a beige sweater, her locks tied back deliberately to convey maternal exhaustion. She looked directly into the camera, a single flawless tear tracking down her cheek. "My beautiful followers," she began, her voice quivering with a practiced, sickening vulnerability. "I never wanted to bring private family matters to the internet, but I have to protect my son. Many of you saw the news reports about the police activity at our home yesterday. Our family experienced a terrifying violation of privacy. My husband's sister Clara has struggled with severe mental instability and deep-seated jealousy for years. She has always fiercely resented our marriage, my public platform, and the beautiful life Brendan and I built together." Naomi paused, taking a shaky breath, pressing a hand to her chest. "While Brendan and I were out of state touring a highly specialized medical facility to get Leo the intensive psychiatric help he desperately needs, Clara illegally broke into our home. She destroyed our property and staged a horrific scene in our utility room to make it look like our sweet boy was being neglected. She terrified a severely autistic child just to frame us out of pure vindictive spite. Please send prayers. We are fighting to keep our family safe from her toxic obsession." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to liquid nitrogen. The sheer audacity of her lies was staggering. She was weaponizing her massive platform to rewrite reality. I scrolled down to the comment section. It was an absolute bloodbath. Naomi's dedicated followers were acting like a rabid digital army mobilized by her fake tears. They were tagging the Chicago Police Department, furiously demanding I be arrested. They were organizing a targeted harassment campaign. Within minutes, they had completely doxed me. They shared my full name, my home address, my phone number, and the exact name of the financial firm where I worked as a senior forensic accountant. I watched in real time as fake one-star reviews flooded my firm's business page. The reviews accused me of being a child abuser, a deranged psychopath, and a jealous barren spinster who hated mothers. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number containing a graphic death threat. My email inbox chimed. It was a highly prioritized message from my managing partner requesting a mandatory urgent meeting on Monday morning regarding a sudden massive public relations crisis involving my name. The firm's servers were receiving thousands of hateful emails demanding my immediate termination. Naomi was not just trying to win an argument, she was executing a calculated, ruthless strategy to destroy my livelihood, my professional credibility, and my ability to ever testify against her. If she ruined my pristine reputation as a forensic accountant, any financial evidence I brought forward would be easily dismissed by her lawyers as the fabricated retaliatory documents of a disgruntled, unhinged relative. She was using her fame to ensure my voice would be permanently silenced before I could even present my case. A normal person would have crumbled under the crushing weight of 2 million people actively wishing for their destruction. But I did not crumble. I poured a glass of cold water, drank it slowly, and walked directly into my home office. I fired up my custom-built desktop computer. The 3 large monitors hummed to life, casting a harsh blue glow across the dark room. If Naomi wanted to play a public game of reputation destruction, she had severely underestimated the opponent she chose to engage. She thought her digital footprint was a weapon. I knew her digital footprint was a liability. Before diving into the financial networks, I opened the public court docket system to check the status of the criminal investigation. What I saw confirmed my darkest fears about the justice system. Brendan and Naomi's high-powered legal team, funded by my parents' deep pockets, had already filed a massive emergency injunction against Child Protective Services and the hospital administration. They had requested an immediate sweeping gag order on all medical staff involved in Leo's admission, preventing Dr. Mitchell from speaking to anyone. Furthermore, they had successfully petitioned to have Leo's temporary custody case transferred to a private judge known for heavily favoring wealthy, prominent families. The legal system was not just moving slowly, it was actively being bought, manipulated, and stonewalled. The police investigation into the padlock and the dog bowl was already being buried under mountains of expensive legal motions, falsified psychiatric evaluations, and character defamation lawsuits aimed directly at me. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing screens. If I waited for the police to sort through the fake medical binders, the expensive defense lawyers, and the corrupt private judges, Leo would be trapped in that house forever. He would be sedated into silence until his organs finally failed, and Naomi would post a tragic, heavily sponsored memorial video about losing her disabled child. The standard route of justice was completely sealed off. But I did not need the standard route. I cracked my knuckles, the sharp sound loud in the quiet apartment. Naomi had built her entire empire on the illusion of limitless wealth and perfect grace. She used that money to shield her cruelty. It was time to show the world exactly how she funded that illusion. It was time to follow the dirty money. The justice system was a machine built to let the wealthy glide. I watched the digital court docket refresh on my monitor, confirming my worst suspicions. Brendan and Naomi had retained a notorious defense firm famous for drowning prosecutors in endless procedural delays. They filed a motion to suppress the photographs I provided to Detective Harrison, claiming illegal entry. They were stalling. Every motion, every injunction, every fake medical evaluation bought them more time to cover their tracks and solidify their control over Leo. If I waited for a judge to sort through their expensive smoke and mirrors, my nephew would become a tragic statistic. Naomi would walk free, shedding crocodile tears on national television while cashing in on a lucrative book deal about her fabricated grief. The police were bound by protocol and warrants. I was bound by none of those things. I operated in a world where actions left indelible marks. You can burn a physical document or bribe a private doctor, but you cannot erase a digital financial footprint once it is logged into an institutional server. Money always leaves a trail, and I was the best bloodhound in Chicago. I turned away from the court docket and focused on my primary monitor. I cracked my knuckles, feeling the familiar precision of my profession wash over me, replacing the overwhelming panic of the past 2 days. I opened my encrypted accounting software. 5 years ago, long before Naomi transformed into a lifestyle guru, and Brendan became a prominent corporate executive, they were drowning in debt. Brendan had launched a logistics startup that barely survived its first year. He begged me to build his entire financial network architecture to save him the cost of hiring a corporate firm. I spent 3 grueling weeks setting up his secure servers, designing the digital pathways for his payroll and private accounts. I knew the exact layout of his digital vault because I built it. Brendan was arrogant, but more importantly, he was deeply lazy. He never bothered to truly understand the back end of his own company. He simply wanted the money to flow seamlessly into his checking account. I gambled on the absolute certainty that he never hired anyone to update the legacy security protocols I installed. He never revoked my master administrative access. I typed in the original backdoor command sequence I coded half a decade ago. A prompt asked for my credentials. I entered my old administrative key. The screen blinked rapidly, processed for an agonizing heartbeat, and then granted me full unrestricted administrative access to the master ledger of Blackwell Enterprises. I began pulling the raw data files, downloading gigabytes of financial records onto a secure offline server. I needed to move fast and leave absolutely zero trace of my intrusion. I started sifting through the standard expense reports, payroll documents, and quarterly tax filings. At first glance, everything appeared entirely normal. Brendan paid himself a massive executive salary, and Naomi received heavy payouts from brand sponsorships. But a trained forensic accountant does not look for what is there. We look for the negative space. I opened a secondary program designed to flag anomalies and cash flow patterns. I fed Brendan's corporate ledgers into the software and watched the data organize itself into visual graphs. Immediately, I saw the arrogance of their spending. Naomi expensed luxury family vacations as corporate marketing research. She wrote off tens of thousands of dollars in designer clothing as business uniforms. It was blatant tax fraud enough to trigger a massive audit, but it was not the smoking gun I needed. Tax evasion would get them fined, not put behind bars for child abuse. I needed to find the exact mechanism they used to fund the dark hidden parts of their life. I tightened my focus, narrowing the search parameters. If they were hiding something significant, they would use a shell company. I started tracking the outgoing wire transfers, looking for large recurring payments that did not align with standard business operations. I combed through hundreds of mundane, everyday transactions until my tired eyes finally caught a highly peculiar rhythm. Every single month, precisely on the 15th day, a massive deposit was made into a secondary, highly obscured account. I leaned closer to the monitor, my heart beating a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I pulled the specific routing information for that account and cross-referenced it with the state corporate registry. The money was flowing into a limited liability company named Oasis Wellness Consulting. The company was registered in Delaware, a state notoriously utilized by wealthy individuals to maintain strict corporate anonymity. I ran a deep diagnostic on Oasis Wellness Consulting. The entity had no public-facing website, it had no listed employees, no physical office address, and no tangible products or services. Yet, it was receiving enormous influxes of cash every single month. I pulled the withdrawal records for Oasis Wellness. The funds were not being used for consulting or wellness. The money was bleeding out rapidly to pay for Naomi's platinum credit cards, Brendan's luxury car leases, and private aviation charter companies. They were funneling vast amounts of cash through a fake company to sustain a lifestyle they could not actually afford on their legitimate incomes. But the burning question remained: where was the initial money coming from? I traced the incoming wire transfers back to their origin point. The dark money funding Oasis Wellness was not coming from Brendan's logistics company. It was not coming from Naomi's social media sponsors. I watched the glowing screen as the Origin Bank information finally decoded and populated directly on my primary monitor. The massive wire transfers were originating from a highly restricted, heavily guarded institutional trust account. I read the name of the originating account aloud in the empty room, feeling the blood turn to absolute ice in my veins. The Harrington Institutional Account. I spoke the words to the empty room. My voice was a harsh whisper that barely broke the silence of my apartment. I knew that name. I knew the weight it carried. But seeing it listed as the primary funding source for a shadowy Delaware corporation felt like finding a loaded weapon hidden in a child's toy box. I needed concrete, irrefutable proof connecting my brother and his wife directly to Oasis Wellness Consulting. In the eyes of the law, a suspicious wire transfer is just an anomaly. I had to prove absolute intent. I had to pierce the corporate veil. I opened a new terminal window on my desktop and initiated a deep dive into the Delaware Division of Corporations Public Registry. Delaware is a notorious safe haven for wealthy individuals seeking total financial secrecy. They do not require the names of managing members to be listed on public formation documents. They only require a registered agent. For most investigators, the trail goes completely cold right there. But I was not just an investigator. I was a senior forensic accountant, and I knew that amateur criminals always leave a digital fingerprint when they set up their initial infrastructure. Brendan was arrogant, but he was incredibly lazy with administrative tasks. I switched back to the administrative portal of his internal network, the very same architecture I had meticulously coded for him 5 years ago. I ran a targeted query through his archived email servers, filtering for the exact date Oasis Wellness was incorporated. I cross-referenced the search with keywords related to registered agent fees, corporate filings, and franchise taxes. The server processed the request for a tense minute, then a single email populated on my screen. It was an automated receipt from a prominent corporate registered agent service based in Wilmington. The receipt confirmed the formation of Oasis Wellness Consulting. I zoomed in on the billing section. Brendan had used his personal platinum credit card to pay the incorporation fee. He had also listed Naomi as the primary contact, using a secondary unlisted email address I recognized immediately from her early social media days. The corporate veil was officially pierced. I had definitively linked them to the shell company, but establishing ownership was only the first step. I needed to map the exact anatomy of the fraud. I needed to show how they were justifying the massive withdrawals from a highly restricted institutional account. I navigated to Brendan's secure cloud storage drive. I bypassed his standard password protection, using the master administrative key I still retained. The directory tree unfolded before me. I ignored the standard corporate folders and scanned the hidden partitions. I found an encrypted folder labeled simply as Oasis Operations. I launched a brute force decryption tool I used for high-level financial audits. Because Brendan notoriously reused variations of his wedding anniversary for all his passwords, the encryption cracked in less than 4 minutes. I opened the folder. My stomach churned with pure disgust as I scrolled through the contents. The folder was a digital factory for manufacturing financial fraud. It contained dozens of blank fake invoice templates. There were forged letterheads from non-existent behavioral therapy clinics, falsified receipts for intensive psychiatric care, and fabricated billing statements for specialized in-home medical equipment. Naomi and Brendan had spent hours crafting an elaborate paper trail to make Oasis Wellness look like a legitimate high-end medical consulting firm. I opened one of the most recent invoices. It was billed to the Harrington Institutional account for $25,000. The line item description read, "Intensive Behavioral Modification Therapy and Secure Facility Upgrades for Minor Patient." They were actively billing a restricted trust fund for the very padlock they used to lock my nephew in a freezing dark basement. They were monetizing his torture. I needed to see exactly how they were spending the stolen money. I shifted my focus back to public records this time, accessing the county property tax database and vehicle registration registries. I ran searches using the Oasis Wellness corporate identification number. The results painted a sickening picture of unhinged greed. 2 years ago, Oasis Wellness purchased a luxury ski condo in Aspen. The deed was entirely in the name of the shell company, effectively hiding the asset from the Internal Revenue Service and completely shielding it from personal liability. 6 months later, the company leased 2 high-end sports cars. Last year, the company paid for a $100,000 renovation on their suburban mansion, listing the luxury kitchen upgrades as therapeutic environmental modifications. Naomi was using the stolen funds to finance the exact aesthetic she sold to her millions of followers. Her entire influencer empire was built on a foundation of systemic child abuse and federal wire fraud. She posted about her exhausting life as a special needs mother, while simultaneously using the money intended for Leo's survival to buy designer handbags and charter private jets. I cross-referenced the dates of the largest wire transfers with Naomi's social media timeline. The correlation was undeniable. The day after they submitted a fraudulent invoice for $30,000 for supposed inpatient psychiatric care, Naomi posted photos from a first-class flight to Paris. The day they billed the trust for $20,000 in specialized dietary supplements, she posted a haul video featuring luxury diamond jewelry. She was literally transforming Leo's physical suffering into cold, hard cash. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. Brendan and Naomi had constructed a flawless, impenetrable fortress of wealth and social status. They had weaponized the legal system to silence anyone who questioned their parenting. They had manipulated my parents into becoming their fiercely loyal attack dogs. They believed their money and their public platform made them entirely untouchable. But as I downloaded the final batch of forged invoices and saved them to my encrypted drives, I felt a dangerous predatory calm settle over my mind. They had built a beautiful, towering house of cards. They had secured the perimeter with expensive lawyers and fake medical binders, but they had carelessly left the financial blueprints lying right on the table. I stared at the blinking cursor on my monitor. The paper trail was absolute. The evidence of federal wire fraud and tax evasion was airtight. But the most crucial question remained unanswered. The Harrington institutional account was heavily guarded by strict fiduciary regulations. A bank does not simply release millions of dollars in restricted funds without incredibly stringent oversight. There had to be a specific, deeply rigid legal mechanism allowing them to access the cash. I needed to uncover the exact parameters of the trust they were draining. I needed to find out why the Harrington account existed in the first place. I opened a new tab and directed my search toward the public probate court archives. I was going to unearth the final missing piece of this horrific puzzle. I navigated to the Massachusetts Public Probate Court archives. The interface was incredibly clunky and severely outdated, a stark contrast to the sleek financial networks I usually infiltrated. I paid the exorbitant access fees using a prepaid digital card and searched for the estate of Beatrice Harrington. The system processed my request, spinning a loading wheel that felt agonizingly slow in the quiet isolation of my apartment. Finally, the digitized probate files appeared on my monitor. I bypassed the standard asset distribution documents and zeroed in on the trust formations. I quickly grabbed a notepad and a pen to document every single restricted clause. There it was. The Harrington Medical Trust. The establishing document was 70 pages of dense legal jargon, purposefully designed to protect a massive fortune from frivolous spending. I downloaded the file and opened it, my eyes rapidly scanning the dense paragraphs. Great-grandmother Harrington had been notoriously sharp, possessing an unparalleled business acumen that my own parents severely lacked. She never trusted my parents with liquid assets, knowing their absolute obsession with country club status and luxury cars would instantly drain her hard-earned wealth. Instead, she locked her money away for the younger generations. I scrolled down to the beneficiary designations. Section 4, subsection C, outlined the specific provisions for my nephew. I read the text aloud, the sterile legal language sending a fresh wave of nausea through my system. A restricted medical trust fund in the absolute amount of $2,500,000 is hereby established for the exclusive direct care and treatment of my great-grandson Leo Blackwell. This fund is explicitly designated to manage his chronic celiac disease, including specialized dietary requirements, necessary medical treatments, and future complications arising from his autoimmune condition, $2.5 million. The sheer magnitude of the fund was absolutely staggering. Great-grandmother had known Leo's diagnosis would require lifelong management, expensive specialized foods, and constant medical monitoring. She wanted to ensure the boy never suffered a single day in his life due to financial constraints. She wanted to build an impenetrable fortress of health around him. But Brendan and Naomi had turned that beautiful fortress into a literal dungeon. They viewed his autoimmune disease not as a tragedy to be managed, but as a massive lottery ticket waiting to be cashed. They had willfully perverted an act of extreme familial love into an instrument of greed. I needed to see the exact withdrawal parameters. I scrolled further down the heavy document to the fiduciary guidelines. The trust mandated extremely strict oversight. A panel of bank-appointed trustees had to approve any medical disbursement over $5,000. The bank required certified pediatric receipts, verified clinic invoices, and direct communication with treating physicians. So how did Brendan and Naomi bypass a team of highly trained Boston bankers? I found the horrific answer buried in a specific amendment clause near the very end of the file. In the event the beneficiary is formally diagnosed with severe incapacitating cognitive or psychiatric disabilities that render standard outpatient care insufficient, the trust may be aggressively accessed for continuous high-level facility care, specialized structural home modifications, and full-time psychiatric nursing. The puzzle pieces slammed together with terrifying crystal-clear precision. Brendan and Naomi could not easily drain a $2.5 million trust just by submitting grocery receipts for gluten-free bread and routine pediatric visits. The bank would monitor those small, everyday transactions closely and cut off the flow of money. They needed a way to completely blindside the financial institution. to access the massive bulk sums of cash necessary to fund their lavish lifestyle and fake influencer empire. They desperately needed a catastrophic diagnosis. They needed Leo to be severely, incurably broken in the eyes of the law and the strict trust administrators. They starved him. They fed him cheap wheat crackers that intentionally triggered violent autoimmune reactions, causing agonizing stomach pain, severe lethargy, and absolute malnourishment. When a starving, desperately sick child cries, endlessly hides in corners, seeking comfort, and lashes out in pure physical agony, it is incredibly easy for a wealthy, persuasive, beautiful mother to bring him to a highly paid private doctor and claim he is suffering from severe, oppositional defiant disorder. They deliberately poisoned their own son to aggressively manufacture the exact psychiatric symptoms required to unlock the trust fund loophole. The sheer cruelty of their ongoing medical deception was absolutely terrifying to witness. Naomi heavily sedated him not just to keep him quiet while they skied in Aspen, but to physically mimic the acute psychosis they claimed he suffered from on those fake medical evaluations. They literally transformed his extreme physical torture into a highly lucrative, completely untraceable revenue stream. Every single time his small body failed, their offshore bank accounts swelled. Every tear he cried funded another first-class flight to Paris. Every ounce of weight he lost bought another designer handbag for Naomi to flaunt on social media. I pushed my ergonomic chair violently back from the desk, my hands trembling so uncontrollably I could barely feel my own fingers. I rushed to the bathroom, gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, and threw up. The absolute depravity of their actions was almost impossible for a normal human brain to process. They were not just neglectful parents. They were highly calculated, cold-blooded monsters operating a sophisticated financial fraud scheme, using their own child as the sacrificial collateral. I washed my face with freezing water, staring at my pale reflection in the mirror. The sadness was gone now. The shock had evaporated. The only thing left in my soul was a dark, dangerous promise of absolute destruction. I walked back to my glowing monitors. I had uncovered the sickening motive and the complex banking mechanism they ruthlessly exploited. But I needed to legally link my parents to this nightmare. I needed to understand exactly how deeply Catherine and Howard were involved in this scheme. I pulled up the primary banking portal for the Harrington institutional account. I needed to see the exact paperwork Brendan and Naomi submitted to trigger these massive wire transfers. A trust of this magnitude did not simply bleed cash without a rigorous verification process. The bank administrators required a mountain of legal and medical justification to release funds. I navigated to the disbursement authorization logs. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I executed a targeted extraction of the PDF attachments linked to every single transaction sent to Oasis Wellness Consulting over the past 2 years. The files downloaded into a neat chronological list on my secondary monitor. I opened the very first authorization request, dated 24 months ago. It was a formal petition to the trust administrators requesting a status change for the primary beneficiary. The petition was accompanied by a highly detailed 50-page psychiatric evaluation. I scanned the medical letterhead. It belonged to a private, extremely expensive pediatric psychiatric clinic in downtown Chicago. A clinic notorious among high-wealth families for providing whatever diagnoses their elite clients required, provided the consulting fee was large enough. I read the clinical summary. The evaluating physician claimed that Leo exhibited severe, uncontrollable psychotic breaks. The report falsely documented episodes of violent self-harm, extreme food aversion, and total cognitive detachment from reality. The doctor explicitly recommended round-the-clock, specialized residential care and intensive behavioral modification therapy. He concluded that standard outpatient treatment was dangerously insufficient for a child with such profound psychiatric disabilities. The cruelty of the fabrication was staggering. Naomi and Brendan had paid a corrupt doctor to legally declare their perfectly sane, physically sick son as severely mentally incapacitated. They stripped away his humanity on paper to satisfy the stringent requirements of the Harrington Trust. Once the bank administrators received this catastrophic diagnosis, the legal gates guarding the $2.5 million swung wide open. The trust was legally bound to provide whatever funds were deemed medically necessary for the beneficiary's survival. I clicked on the next document in the digital pile. It was a service contract between Brendan and Oasis Wellness Consulting. The contract officially designated Oasis Wellness as the primary specialized care provider for Leo. Brendan had signed the document as the legal guardian, and a fictional executive director had signed on behalf of the wellness company. They had essentially hired themselves to treat the fake psychiatric conditions they had just paid a corrupt doctor to diagnose. It was a closed loop of absolute unchecked financial fraud. I tracked the subsequent wire transfers. The sheer volume of the theft was breathtaking. In January, Oasis Wellness billed the trust $40,000 for a specialized sensory deprivation enclosure and continuous behavioral monitoring. I matched the exact date of that transfer with Naomi's social media timeline. That same week, Naomi posted photos showing off a complete luxury remodel of her master bathroom, featuring imported Italian marble and a custom sauna. She transformed her son's fake sensory deprivation chamber into her personal spa. In March, another invoice was submitted to the bank. This one demanded $60,000 for advanced pharmacological interventions and specialized out-of-state therapeutic transport. I pulled the matching financial records from the Oasis Wellness ledgers. The $60,000 was immediately wired to a luxury automotive dealership. Brendan used the funds intended for his son's fake therapeutic transport to secure a lease on a brand-new custom-ordered sports car. Every single invoice was a masterclass in deceptive billing. They used clinical, highly technical language to describe luxury purchases. A request for therapeutic environmental stabilization was actually the installation of a massive heated swimming pool in their backyard. A bill for specialized dietary management and nutritional counseling was funneled directly into Naomi's personal accounts to pay for her private chef and weekly deliveries of imported champagne. They were draining the trust fund dry, treating a medical safety net like a limitless, untraceable slush fund. But as I dug deeper into the intricate web of wire transfers, I noticed a critical vulnerability in their scheme. Brendan and Naomi were greedy, but they were also financially reckless. Oasis Wellness Consulting was a newly formed, unverified limited liability company. Even with the falsified medical records, the conservative bank administrators managing the Harrington Trust would have required a substantial financial guarantee before authorizing direct continuous wire transfers to a completely unknown entity. They would demand a surety bond or a heavily vetted corporate guarantor to ensure the funds were protected against misappropriation. Brendan's personal credit was completely ruined from his previous failed startups. Naomi's income as an influencer was erratic and heavily dependent on fluctuating brand deals. Neither of them possessed the pristine financial standing required to act as a guarantor for a multi-million-dollar medical servicing contract. The bank needed absolute assurance that the money was safe. Someone else had to have backed the play. Someone with flawless credit, substantial liquid assets, and a long-standing relationship with the bank. Someone whose reputation was entirely unblemished in the corporate world. I opened the final master authorization agreement, the foundational document that finalized the relationship between the Harrington Trust Brendan and Oasis Wellness Consulting. I scrolled past the dense legal jargon, the liability waivers, and the strict indemnification clauses. I scrolled straight to the very last page where the digital signatures were legally bound, time-stamped, and securely recorded by the banking institution. I stopped breathing. The air in my apartment felt completely stagnant. I stared at the glowing pixels on my monitor, my eyes tracing the stark, undeniable proof of the ultimate betrayal. At the bottom of the page, acting as the primary financial guarantors for Oasis Wellness Consulting, ensuring that every single fraudulent wire transfer was fully protected and approved by the bank, were two highly familiar signatures. They had pledged their own home, their extensive retirement accounts, and their entire financial portfolio as collateral to secure the ongoing theft. They had legally facilitated the exact mechanism that allowed Naomi and Brendan to lock Leo in a basement and starve him for cash. The final piece of the puzzle snapped into place, revealing a level of family corruption so deep and terrifying it defied all logic. My parents, Catherine and Howard, were the financial architects of their grandson's torture. I stared at the signatures on the screen, my mind refusing to accept the reality of the digital ink. Catherine and Howard Blackwell. The names were written in their unmistakable, sweeping cursive. They had personally guaranteed a $500,000 line of credit for Oasis Wellness Consulting. They had legally bound their own pristine credit scores and their entire retirement portfolio to a fraudulent shell company. My parents did not just turn a blind eye to the abuse of their grandson, they financed the very mechanism that allowed the abuse to happen. A wave of profound physical sickness washed over me. I pushed my ergonomic chair back and paced the length of my home office, trying to force air into my burning lungs. I needed to understand the complete scope of their complicity. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. I sat back down and opened a new search terminal, diving directly into my parents' personal financial records. I had managed their tax returns 3 years ago, and I still had their primary account routing numbers stored safely in my encrypted client vault. I ran a comprehensive audit on their checking and savings accounts, cross-referencing the dates with the massive withdrawals from the Harrington Medical Trust. The pattern emerged within minutes, stark and undeniable. My parents were not just passive guarantors. They were actively benefiting from the stolen money. Every time Naomi and Brendan submitted a fraudulent medical invoice to the bank and drained tens of thousands of dollars into Oasis Wellness, a specific percentage of that money was subsequently wired directly into my parents' primary checking account. The transfers were labeled as personal loan repayments, but the math told a completely different story. The amounts perfectly covered my parents' exorbitant country club membership fees, my mother's monthly luxury shopping bills, and the property taxes on their sprawling suburban estate. My parents were entirely broke. I opened their investment portfolio and gasped at the screen. Their heavily leveraged real estate investments had completely tanked 4 years ago. They had lost almost everything in a series of disastrous commercial developments. They were drowning in debt, completely desperate to maintain their illusion of generational wealth among their elite social circle. Brendan and Naomi had offered them a lucrative lifeline. A sick, twisted financial lifeline built entirely on the physical suffering of an innocent 8-year-old boy. They all made a silent, monstrous pact. Naomi and Brendan needed flawless financial guarantors to trick the strict Boston bankers into releasing the restricted trust funds. My parents needed a steady stream of untraceable cash to prevent their own imminent bankruptcy and devastating social ruin. Leo was nothing but the profitable collateral damage in their horrific financial arrangement. My mother knew exactly why Leo was locked in that freezing basement. She knew why he was fed wheat crackers that aggressively destroyed his intestines. She knew about the heavy adult sedatives. She actively supported the public narrative of his severe mental illness, because every fake psychiatric evaluation meant another wire transfer from the bank. Every time she commented on Naomi's social media posts praising her resilience as a special needs mother, she was viciously protecting her own revenue stream. The sheer scale of the betrayal broke something fundamental inside me. The last lingering remnants of my familial loyalty disintegrated into absolute dust. I was no longer looking at my family. I was looking at a highly organized criminal syndicate. I moved with cold, mechanical precision. I created a master dossier containing every single piece of evidence. I compiled the forged medical evaluations, the Oasis Wellness Incorporation documents, the wire transfer logs, and the loan agreements bearing my parents' signatures. I matched every fraudulent invoice to Naomi's luxury purchases and my parents' country club payments. I created detailed spreadsheets mapping the exact flow of the stolen money from the Harrington Trust directly to their personal pockets. I transferred the entire dossier onto 3 separate encrypted flash drives. I placed one drive in my wall safe. I slipped the second drive into my coat pocket. The third drive was reserved for my ultimate weapon. I needed irrefutable visual proof to accompany the financial data. I needed the world to see the physical reality of their crimes. I switched back to the hidden camera feeds on Brendan's server. I downloaded the raw high-definition security footage from the kitchen camera. I secured the video of Naomi crushing the prescription sedatives into a glass of water and forcing Leo to drink it. I downloaded the footage of her shoving his stumbling body into the utility room and violently snapping the heavy industrial padlock onto the door frame. The video files were crystal clear, completely unedited, and permanently time-stamped. I loaded the security footage onto the third flash drive, placing it carefully in my leather portfolio alongside the printed financial summaries. My phone vibrated loudly on the desk. It was an automated notification from the Chicago Memorial Hospital patient tracking system. I had secretly registered my number as an emergency contact when the paramedics first brought Leo into the trauma unit. The notification text was brief but terrifying. Patient Leo Blackwell has been medically cleared for discharge. Custody transferred to temporary legal guardians Catherine and Howard Blackwell. My blood ran completely cold. The corrupt private judge had successfully fast-tracked the custody order. My parents were taking Leo home today. They were going to drag him right back into that house of horrors before the police could finish processing the basement crime scene. If they got him behind closed doors, they would silence him permanently. They had far too much to lose now. They knew the authorities were circling, and they would do whatever it took to eliminate the only surviving witness to their massive crimes. I glanced at the clock on my wall. It was 9 in the morning. I knew exactly what Naomi would do next. She was a creature of absolute vanity and extreme public manipulation. She would never simply walk out the back door of the hospital. She would use Leo's discharge as a massive public relations opportunity. She would stage a highly visible event to completely control the narrative, framing herself as the triumphant, loving mother bringing her troubled child home after a tragic misunderstanding. She would use the local media to paint me as the jealous villain and completely bury the truth under a mountain of fake tears. I grabbed my leather portfolio and my car keys. I did not feel any fear or anxiety. I felt only the heavy, absolute certainty of an executioner stepping up to the block. They thought their stolen money, their expensive lawyers, and their fake social standing made them entirely untouchable. They thought they could silence a senior forensic accountant by destroying my reputation online. They were about to learn a very brutal lesson about the real power of numbers. I walked out of my apartment, locking the door firmly behind me. The winter air was biting, but the freezing wind felt sharp and cleansing. I got into my car and started the engine. I was heading back to Chicago Memorial Hospital. I was going to walk straight into their carefully orchestrated media circus, and I was going to burn their entire empire to the absolute ground. Every lie, every stolen dollar, every ounce of their fake prestige was about to be broadcast to the world. They wanted a public spectacle. I was going to give them one they would never forget. The heavy glass doors of Chicago Memorial Hospital parted with a soft mechanical hiss. I stepped into the expansive main lobby and the sheer scale of Naomi's media spectacle hit me instantly. She had orchestrated a fully produced press conference. Local news crews had their cameras mounted on tripods. Several prominent lifestyle bloggers were live streaming from their phones. A ring of bright lighting equipment illuminated the center of the atrium. Naomi stood at a hastily assembled podium looking like a tragic heroine. She wore a tailored beige trench coat over a modest white blouse, her locks tied back with a simple silk ribbon. Her makeup was an absolute masterclass in subtle distress, highlighting the fake tears welling in her eyes. Brendan stood loyally at her right side, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. My parents. Catherine and Howard anchored her left side, projecting the image of a wealthy, unified, and deeply concerned family. I stood near the entrance, completely ignored by the busy camera crews, and listened to the venomous lies spilling from my sister-in-law. My husband and I have lived a private nightmare for years, Naomi told the bank of microphones, her voice quivering with expertly calibrated emotion. Raising a child with severe cognitive impairment and acute psychosis, is a burden no parent should ever have to bear. We love Leo with every fiber of our beings. We have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on private behavioral therapy. We were out of state touring an exclusive residential facility to get him the round-the-clock psychiatric care he so desperately needs. She paused, reaching up to delicately wipe a tear from her cheek. Brendan kissed her temple, playing the role of the devoted, exhausted father perfectly. But what breaks my heart entirely, Naomi continued looking directly into the primary news camera, is the betrayal of our own family. Brendan's sister Clara has struggled with severe undocumented mental instability for most of her adult life. She has always harbored a toxic, dangerous jealousy toward my marriage and my public platform. Yesterday, she illegally broke into our secured home. She intentionally terrified our severely autistic son and staged a horrific crime scene in our utility room simply to frame us. She weaponized our child's tragic mental illness to destroy my career out of pure spite. A murmur of intense sympathy rippled through the gathered reporters. My mother nodded solemnly behind Naomi, adding visual credibility to the vicious character assassination. They were completely burying me alive in the court of public opinion. They were ensuring that any financial evidence I brought forward would be instantly dismissed as the fabricated revenge of a jealous, unhinged spinster. I adjusted my grip on my sleek leather portfolio. I did not feel a single ounce of fear. I walked straight past the velvet ropes sectioning off the press area, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor with a rhythmic, undeniable authority. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the hushed sympathy of the lobby like a heavy steel blade. Every camera instantly pivoted toward me. The reporters turned around, their microphones shifting in my direction. Naomi's fake smile vanished completely. Brendan's eyes widened in absolute terror. My mother stepped forward, her face instantly twisting into a mask of pure rage. "Clara," my mother hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You have no right to be here. Security, please remove this unstable woman immediately. She is harassing us." I ignored my mother completely. I bypassed the podium and walked straight toward the massive 65-inch smart television mounted on the lobby wall, typically used by the hospital administration to display directory information and health initiatives. "I have every right to be here," I announced, projecting my voice so that every single news microphone picked up my audio perfectly. Because unlike the people standing behind that podium, I did not bring fake tears or fabricated psychiatric diagnoses today. I brought actual evidence. "Shut those cameras off right now," Brendan barked, stepping toward me aggressively, his corporate composure fracturing into sheer panic. "Clara, I am warning you for the last time. Do not do this." "You warned me you would sue me for breaking and entering, Brendan," I replied coldly, never breaking my stride. "But I think the federal authorities will be much more interested in your massive tax evasion, institutional wire fraud, and the attempted murder of your own son." The word murder caused a massive collective gasp among the press corps. The camera operators who Brendan had just commanded to stop filming aggressively zoomed in on my face. "She is totally unhinged," Naomi shrieked, her carefully crafted maternal persona crumbling into genuine raw panic. "Do not listen to a word she says. She is obsessed with ruining my brand. She staged that basement." I did not engage with her screaming. I reached the large smart television, pulled the encrypted USB flash drive from my coat pocket and plugged it directly into the side port. I pulled out my mobile phone and used the administrative override application I had prepared earlier to cast my files directly to the hospital screen. "You just told the entire world that Leo locked himself in that room during a violent psychotic break," I said loudly, turning to face the bank of flashing cameras. "You claimed he stole your prescription medication and hoarded food. Let us show everyone exactly what kind of mother you really are, Naomi. Let us see what really happened on Tuesday morning." I tapped my phone screen. The high-definition video file launched immediately on the massive lobby television. It was the raw, unedited, metadata-verified security footage from Brendan's own internal network servers. The entire hospital lobby fell into a stunned, horrified silence. The footage showed Naomi standing at her kitchen island fully dressed in her winter ski gear. Leo stood beside her looking fragile, emaciated, and absolutely terrified. We watched. We watched as Naomi swatted his small hands away with a look of pure disgust. She reached into her expensive leather handbag, pulled out a translucent orange prescription bottle, and sharply tapped 2 white pills onto the marble counter. The camera angle captured her grabbing a heavy metal spoon, crushing the medication into a fine powder, and aggressively stirring it into a glass of tap water. She shoved the glass against Leo's mouth, forcing him to swallow the heavily sedated mixture. The hospital lobby was dead silent, save for the mechanical hum of camera shutters and the gasps of the reporters. On the massive screen, 10 minutes sped by in a fast-forward sequence I had pre-programmed. The footage slowed back to normal speed, just as the heavy adult sedatives took hold of my 8-year-old nephew. Leo stumbled, his eyes rolling back, his tiny hands grasping blindly at the kitchen cabinets for balance. Naomi did not help him. She grabbed him roughly by the bicep, dragging his limp body down the hallway toward the basement stairs. The camera feed switched to the lower-level angle, showing her shoving him inside the dark utility room and slamming the heavy oak door. Then, in pristine high definition, she retrieved the industrial steel padlock, snapped it securely onto the exterior bracket, and casually tossed the silver key into her purse. She turned to the camera, smoothed her hair plastered on a radiant smile, and snapped her airport selfie. "That is a complete fabrication!" Naomi shrieked, her voice cracking wildly as she scrambled away from the podium. "She is a computer hacker. She manipulated that video to make me look bad. Brendan, do something. Do something right now." Brendan stood completely paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as the reporters swarmed closer, thrusting microphones into his face. My mother was hyperventilating, clutching her chest, while my father stared at the screen in absolute terrified shock. She drugged him to keep him quiet while she skied. I projected my voice over the chaotic shouting of the press corps. But physical abuse is only a fraction of what happened here. You all want to know why a wealthy corporate executive and a prominent lifestyle influencer refused to simply hire a private nurse for a sick child. Let me show you the real motive. Let me show you the money. I tapped my phone screen again. The horrific basement footage vanished instantly, replaced by a series of high-resolution banking documents. The logo of a prominent Boston financial institution filled the screen alongside a bold header reading, Harrington Medical Trust. My great-grandmother left a $2.5 million restricted trust fund exclusively for Leo to manage his celiac disease, I explained, pacing in front of the television, ensuring every camera caught my face and the evidence behind me. The Bank Oversight Committee strictly prohibited the withdrawal of these funds for anything other than verified critical medical care. Standard gluten-free groceries and basic pediatric visits were heavily scrutinized. Naomi and Brendan could not get their hands on the bulk cash. I swiped my screen, bringing up the falsified psychiatric evaluation from the corrupt Chicago clinic. To bypass the strict banking regulations, my brother and his wife paid a private doctor to completely falsify Leo's medical records. They legally reclassified a perfectly sane, physically sick 8-year-old boy as severely mentally incapacitated. They claimed he suffered from acute psychosis, violent self-harm tendencies, and massive cognitive failure. They starved him and deliberately fed him gluten to manufacture physical distress, then legally labeled him insane. The reporters began shouting questions, the flashes from their cameras creating a blinding strobe light effect in the hospital lobby. I raised my hand, demanding silence, and swiped to the next slide. Once the bank approved the catastrophic diagnosis, Brendan and Naomi incorporated a shadow company in Delaware named Oasis Wellness Consulting. I pointed to the incorporation documents displayed on the screen, clearly showing Brendan's credit card receipt and Naomi's hidden email address. They named this fake company as Leo's primary specialized care provider. They essentially hired themselves to treat the fake psychiatric conditions they had just invented. I pulled up the master ledger I had extracted from Brendan's internal servers. The screen split into 2 columns. On the left were the fraudulent medical invoices submitted to the bank. On the right were Naomi's corresponding social media posts and credit card statements. In January, Oasis, Wellness billed the trust $40,000 for a specialized sensory deprivation enclosure, I read aloud, my voice ringing with righteous, cold fury. That same week, Naomi posted a video showcasing her brand new imported Italian marble master bathroom and custom sauna. In March, they billed the trust $60,000 for advanced pharmacological interventions and out-of-state therapeutic transport. That money was immediately wired to a luxury automotive dealership to secure a lease on Brendan's new sports car. Brendan let out a strangled, pathetic gasp, covering his face with his hands. Naomi was frantically pushing against my father, trying to find an escape route through the growing crowd of horrified onlookers and aggressive journalists. Every designer bag, every first-class flight, every single piece of that flawless influencer aesthetic was funded by child abuse and federal wire fraud, I declared. They literally turned a sick child's physical suffering into a limitless, untraceable slush fund. My father finally broke his terrified silence. He lunged toward the cameras, waving his hands frantically. We had absolutely nothing to do with this. Catherine and I are completely innocent. We believed the doctors. We thought our grandson was receiving proper care. Clara is attacking her own parents out of spite. I turned to look directly at the man who had enabled my brother's destructive arrogance for decades. The man who had repeatedly demanded I sacrifice my own stability to maintain their wealthy facade. Then I slowly tapped my mobile phone screen one final time. The screen behind me flickered, and the split view of invoices and luxury purchases vanished. In its place appeared a massive, high-resolution scan of a legal banking document. The bold text at the top read, "Master Authorization and Financial Guarantee Agreement." I swiped my finger across my phone, and the image on the television zoomed in dramatically on the bottom of the final page. "Are you completely innocent, Dad?" I asked, my voice echoing off the marble walls of the hospital lobby. "Then you will have to explain to the press, the bank, and the federal government why your signature and Mom's signature are sitting right there." The cameras flashed wildly as the reporters captured the indisputable proof. Right beneath the fraudulent $500,000 line of credit for Oasis Wellness Consulting were the clear, sweeping signatures of Howard and Catherine Blackwell. "You did not just believe the fake doctors," I announced to the room, locking eyes with my father. "You actively financed the deception." Brendan and Naomi had ruined credit. They could not secure the massive wire transfers on their own. The strict Boston bankers needed a flawless corporate guarantor to release the restricted funds from the Harrington Medical Trust. You and Mom pledged your home, your retirement accounts, and your entire financial portfolio to guarantee their dummy corporation. You provided the key that unlocked the vault. My father staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His face was devoid of color. "But that is not the most disgusting part," I continued, turning to face the reporters. "I audited my parents' personal accounts. Every time a fraudulent medical invoice was paid out to Oasis Wellness, a percentage of that stolen money was wired directly into Howard and Catherine's primary checking account. They used the money intended to keep their grandson alive, to pay their exorbitant country club fees, my mother's luxury shopping bills, and the property taxes on their mansion. They sold an 8-year-old boy's health to maintain their fake social status." My mother let out a shrill, piercing scream. She dropped to her knees right there in front of the flashing cameras. "Clara, please stop this right now," she wailed, her pristine image entirely shattered. "We were bankrupt. We had lost everything in those commercial real estate investments. Brendan promised us this was a legitimate medical business. We did not know he was hurting Leo. We just needed the money to save our home." "You knew," I stated with absolute finality. "You knew Leo was locked in that basement. You knew he was fed wheat crackers that destroyed his intestines. You knew he was sedated. You actively defended Naomi's public narrative about his severe mental illness, because every fake psychiatric episode generated a new invoice, and every new invoice kept you out of bankruptcy." The reporters began shouting aggressive questions at my parents. Microphones were shoved into their faces. The lifestyle bloggers who had been live streaming Naomi's fake tears were now documenting the complete destruction of the Blackwell family empire. Naomi was frantically pushing against Brendan, looking for an escape route, but the crowd of horrified onlookers had formed an impenetrable wall around the lobby. "This is illegal!" Naomi shrieked, her voice cracking with raw panic as she shoved a camera away from her face. "You cannot record me. You cannot show my private banking records. I am calling my lawyers. I will sue this entire hospital." "You will not need to call your lawyers," a deep, commanding voice echoed from the main entrance. The heavy sliding doors of the hospital swung open, and the atmosphere in the lobby shifted instantly. Detective Harrison walked through the entrance, his face set in a grim, unyielding expression. But he had not come alone. He was flanked by 4 uniformed Chicago police officers. Behind them marched 2 individuals wearing dark windbreakers with the letters FBI printed boldly in stark yellow across their backs. Trailing the federal agents was a stern-looking man clutching a thick leather briefcase, carrying the undeniable aura of a federal prosecutor. The final 2 figures to enter the lobby wore badges identifying them as special agents for the Internal Revenue Service. The cavalry had arrived, and they brought the full crushing weight of the federal government with them. "Naomi and Brendan Blackwell," Detective Harrison announced, his voice carrying effortlessly over the chaotic noise of the press corps. "You are under arrest for severe child endangerment, felony child abuse, and attempted manslaughter." Before Naomi could even process the local charges, one of the FBI agents stepped forward and presented a federal warrant. "And you are also being taken into immediate federal custody for massive institutional wire fraud, bank fraud, and severe tax evasion," the agent declared. Naomi lost her mind. The perfectly curated influencer who had spent years projecting effortless grace and wealthy superiority threw a violent screaming tantrum in the middle of the hospital. "Do not touch me," she thrashed wildly as 2 uniformed officers moved in with handcuffs. "I am a public figure. You are making a huge mistake. Clara hacked my servers. She fabricated those videos. I am a devoted mother." Her manicured wrists were forcefully pulled behind her back, and the cold steel cuffs clicked shut. Her designer coat ripped at the shoulder as she violently resisted the officers. Brendan did not put up a fight. The golden child, the arrogant corporate executive, who had spent his entire life being bailed out by his family, simply crumpled. He fell to his knees on the polished marble floor, weeping loudly and pathetically as the FBI agent secured the handcuffs around his wrists. He offered no defense, no arrogant threats, just the pathetic sobs of a man who finally realized his parents' money could not buy his way out of a federal indictment. As the officers began hauling Naomi and Brendan toward the exit, my father desperately lunged toward the federal prosecutor. "Please, there has been a terrible misunderstanding," my father begged, his corporate pride entirely broken. "We are respected members of this community. We had absolutely no idea what Brendan and Naomi were doing with that money. We just co-signed a loan to help our son start a wellness clinic. You must believe us." The IRS agent stepped smoothly in front of the prosecutor, blocking my father's path. "Howard and Catherine Blackwell," the agent said, producing a thick stack of legal documents from his jacket. "We have secured immediate federal warrants to freeze your primary bank accounts, your retirement portfolios, and your investment holdings. We are placing an immediate lien on your suburban estate, pending a comprehensive federal investigation into your direct financial involvement with Oasis Wellness Consulting." My mother let out a horrific, guttural wail. She scrambled across the floor, her expensive cashmere wrap dragging across the tiles. She reached out and grabbed the hem of my tailored suit pants. "Clara, please," she begged, her mascara running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. "Please tell them we are innocent. Tell them to spare the house. We are your family. You cannot let them take everything we own. You must protect us." I looked down at the woman who had happily sacrificed her 8-year-old grandson to maintain her social status. I felt no pity. I felt no guilt. I felt only the clean, cold clarity of absolute justice. "You stopped being my family the moment you defended the monsters who starved an innocent child," I said softly, stepping backward so her hands fell empty to the floor. "Save your tears, Catherine. The federal government does not care about your country club reputation." I turned my back on them and walked away. I walked out of the hospital lobby, the frantic shouts of reporters and my mother's wailing fading behind the heavy glass doors. The winter air felt crisp and entirely purifying. I took a deep breath, letting the clean cold fill my lungs. The fallout over the next few months was swift, brutal, and absolutely merciless. The federal justice system does not play games when presented with irrefutable evidence of wire fraud and severe child endangerment. Naomi and Brendan were formally arraigned the following morning in federal court. Their expensive defense attorneys desperately attempted to secure their release, arguing that they were prominent, respectable community members. The federal judge took one look at the significant flight risk posed by their remaining offshore accounts and the undeniable horrific severity of the security footage. Bail was denied immediately. They were remanded directly to federal holding facilities, trading their custom designer wardrobes and luxury ski gear for standard-issue prison jumpsuits. They are currently awaiting a trial that carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. Naomi's carefully curated influencer empire evaporated overnight. Her lucrative brand sponsors dropped her within hours of the arrest broadcast. Her 2 million devoted followers instantly transformed into a furious digital mob demanding maximum sentencing. My parents faced a different kind of absolute destruction. The Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation systematically dismantled their financial facade. With their bank accounts entirely frozen and a massive federal lien placed directly on their suburban mansion, the grand illusion of their generational wealth shattered completely. The bank initiated aggressive foreclosure proceedings within 30 days. Their prestigious country club formally revoked their membership, and their elite social circle vanished instantly, treating my parents like a highly contagious disease. Stripped of their stolen funds, Catherine and Howard were forced to abandon their luxury estate and move into a cramped, rundown apartment on the far outskirts of the city. They were left to survive solely on a meager, fixed income, entirely drowning in insurmountable legal debt and looming bankruptcy. Pure desperation drove them to extreme measures. My mother called my office lines relentlessly until my firm's security team permanently blocked her number. Then the frantic handwritten letters started arriving at my apartment. They begged for my forgiveness. They pleaded for a temporary cash loan just to hire a decent bankruptcy lawyer. My father wrote long, pathetic paragraphs reminding me of the sacrifices he supposedly made for my upbringing. He conveniently ignored the absolute fact that I paid for my own degree after they drained my savings for Brendan. They demanded I remember family loyalty and step up to save them from total ruin. I read the very first letter, walked over to my home office, and fed it directly into the shredder. I threw the rest of their correspondence into the trash unopened. I felt zero obligation to rescue the financial architects of my nephew's torture. Let them finally experience the bitter reality of the consequences they spent a lifetime avoiding. While my biological relatives drowned in the consequences of their own horrific greed, I directed every ounce of my energy toward the only family member who actually mattered. The court proceedings to legally strip Brendan and Naomi of their parental rights moved with unprecedented speed, bolstered by the overwhelming federal evidence and the undeniable severity of the medical records. After passing a rigorous background check and a comprehensive psychological evaluation, a family court judge granted me full permanent legal custody of Leo. Furthermore, the bank administrators appointed me as the sole acting executor of the remaining Harrington Medical Trust. I sold my cramped downtown apartment and purchased a beautiful sunlit house in a quiet, highly rated school district. I spent weeks preparing a specialized kitchen to ensure absolutely zero cross-contamination for his celiac disease. The first few months were incredibly challenging. Leo was deeply traumatized, terrified of closed doors, and prone to hoarding food under his pillow. I hired an excellent trauma therapist, a real professional who worked patiently to help him rebuild his shattered sense of safety. 6 months later, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. I sat at my kitchen island on a bright Sunday morning, the warm sunlight streaming through the large bay windows. The rich smell of gluten-free pancakes filled the air. Auntie Clara, a loud, cheerful voice called out from the hallway. Leo ran into the kitchen, his cheeks flushed and full of life. He had gained a healthy 20 pounds since that horrific day in the basement. His eyes were bright, his energy absolutely boundless. The dark shadows that used to haunt his young expression were entirely gone, completely, replaced by the radiant light of a child who finally knew he was genuinely loved, safe, and heard. And, "Pancakes are ready, buddy," I smiled, sliding a warm plate across the marble counter. He scrambled onto the stool, digging in with a happy, contented sigh. I watched him eat, a deep, unwavering warmth filling my chest. The world had constantly tried to tell me that blood and loyalty were the exact same thing. Society often demands that family is an unbreakable bond, even when that bond is actively destroying your sanity and your safety. But I learned the absolute truth. Family is not defined by the people who happen to share your last name, or the people who demand your silence to protect their dark secrets. Family is defined by the people who would shatter a steel padlock to save you. It is defined by the people who refuse to let you starve in the dark. I lost my parents and my brother, but I gained a brilliant, beautiful son. I lost a toxic illusion, but I found my authentic reality. Never be afraid to sever the toxic ties that bind you. Sometimes you have to burn the diseased family tree to the ground just to let the sunlight reach the branches that actually want to grow. Have you ever had to expose a toxic family dynamic to protect someone you love? Share your story in the comments below, and remember that your peace is always worth protecting. The story of Clara and her nephew Leo serves as a harrowing but necessary reminder of a truth society often tries to ignore. Sharing DNA does not automatically make someone family. We are conditioned from birth to believe that blood is thicker than water, that familial loyalty should be absolute, and that we must protect our relatives at all costs. However, the darkest betrayals often come from those who demand this unconditional loyalty while offering nothing but manipulation in return. The ultimate lesson here is that true family is forged through actions, protection, and unconditional love, not merely by the coincidence of genetics. In this narrative, the biological relatives weaponized their status and wealth to mask unthinkable cruelty. They hid behind the polished veneer of social media perfection and corporate respectability, using their biological connection as a shield against accountability. The grandparents, desperate to maintain their luxurious lifestyle and pristine social standing, were willing to sacrifice an innocent 8-year-old boy. This exposes the dangerous fallacy of blind family loyalty. When the obligation to protect the family name supersedes the fundamental duty to protect a vulnerable child, the concept of family becomes a toxic prison rather than a sanctuary. Clara shows that breaking free from this toxic cycle requires immense courage. It takes profound strength to look at the people who raised you and recognize them not as caregivers, but as accomplices to abuse. Society often shames those who walk away from their parents or siblings, labeling them as vindictive, bitter, or selfish. Yet Clara proves that severing these diseased roots is sometimes the only way to allow new healthy branches to grow. Refusing to participate in a family system of generational trauma is an act of profound love, not just for oneself but for the innocent victims caught in the crossfire. Ultimately, the resolution of the story beautifully redefines what it means to be family. Family is not about upholding a flawless public image or covering up dark financial secrets to survive bankruptcy. It is about who is willing to break down a steel padlock to pull you out of the dark. It is about providing a safe, warm environment where a child can eat a simple meal without fear and heal from their deepest psychological wounds. Clara lost her biological parents and brother, but she created a genuine, authentic family with her nephew built on an unshakable foundation of safety and truth. The courage to dismantle a corrupt family system is a painful but deeply purifying fire, We must permanently stop romanticizing the idea that we owe our abusers our silence simply because we share a last name. We have the absolute right to curate our own realities and build a chosen family that continuously nurtures our physical and emotional well-being. By completely letting go of the toxic illusion of biological obligation, we open the door to genuine peace, unshakable justice, and authentic connection. If you have ever found the strength to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace, please share your story of healing in the comments below.